You're listening to the Patient Experience Blueprint with Intibio.
All right, welcome everyone. Super happy to have you all here. Thank you for joining us on the Patient Experience podcast. Today, we're super excited and thrilled to have Jinesh Patel from Uptime Health. He's coming on to tell us a little about his journey in healthcare, working with medical devices, some of the things that kind of got him going, and a little bit about what they do and how they serve, healthcare providers around North America. So maybe we can just jump right in. Jinesh, tell us a little bit about how you got started. Tell us a little bit about what Uptime Health does, and we'll start off there.
Appreciate it. Well, thanks for having me on, Josh. Always happy to talk about what we're doing for the patient care experience and just healthcare providers. So how we got started, we at a high level help people manage the medical equipment in the offices that take care of the patients. At the end of the day, we say that healthcare is provided by three variables. You need a patient, first of all, you need a provider, and then you need some kind of instrumentation or a medical device. It's hardly any procedures that you find today that don't require something or some sort of instrument to conduct the care. So that's kind of some backdrop. My background is I'm a biomedical engineer. So I did device design and invention early on, got my MBA, and eventually went into what they call clinical engineering management. And that's the people who operate in the basement that take care of all the equipment on all the floors of your hospital. And so that's why I have a big bias to that third variable, is it doesn't seem like many people talk about taking care of the equipment that takes care of the patients. They all talk about patient workflow, billing management, data, all of the other things that are very important. But I see that third variable so critical that if you don't have it, you're not providing any care at all.
Well, I think if we were to translate this into the dentist language, when it comes to your equipment, you have preventative, you have your restorative, and then you have your major overhauls. And I think what you talk a lot about is probably on the preventative side. How do we make sure equipment doesn't break down, but when it does break down, that we're fixing it on the restorative side rather than having to purchase a whole new unit, which I would categorize as like the major overhaul of a medical device. Are you doing all three of those categories?
Essentially, yeah. And so at the end of the day, it's one of those things that a little bit of cost up front delays much larger costs in the future. And any healthcare provider, going back to the preventative, is like, take your vitamins, do your exercises, take care of yourself, because you can mitigate a lot of catastrophic healthcare problems in the future. Same thing with medical equipment. And it's not just the cost of the repair itself. It's actually also the cost of downtime, meaning missed revenue, because you're not billing purposes. It's a cost of your team and your administrators and your assistants and your doctors working around a problem, creating burnout. It's also the cost of the patient, maybe missing a care or missing an appointment because the machines aren't working, having to reschedule, causing backlog in the future. So there's a lot of cascading issues. But yeah, I got into it because I did this for healthcare systems. And I realized as we were expanding, we started acquiring a ton of urgent cares in the US, especially in Austin, Texas, where I was operating. We can't go 5 miles without seeing like an urgent care or dental office or some kind of outpatient healthcare facility in a strip mall. And we basically realized that people in those smaller environments know less about how to take care of their equipment because they don't have like somebody just like me in their basements. There is no basement. And usually it's just a couple doctors, a couple front desk people, some office managers, some assistants. That's who operates that building, but they're really good at patient care. So that's not to negate that, but they're not great at knowing how to take care of their equipment because that's not what they went to school for. And so we created a software tool that helps them manage all of that and says, here's what you own and here's how you take care of what you own.
Wonderful. So you cover within your Uptime Health all three categories, everything from like what you need to be doing daily or after X certain amount of hours or procedures or weekly maintenance. Then you have like maybe your tune-ups every year, you bring it in and you just have, maybe some seals replaced. I'm a total speaking out of nowhere on this. And then maybe you have a major overhaul every several years where you take the whole unit assembly apart and do a full cleaning. Is that essentially the nuts to soup kind of scope of what you do?
At some level. So yes, we tell you based on what you own, what are those daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, annual, like hygiene maintenance
So
things.
let's dig into that first. I think there's obviously, I would imagine if it's anything like washing and cleaning my car, I am terrible at the maintenance.
Yes.
Which usually leads to, more visits to the shop and more bills on my end. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what you do that most people are unaware of or aren't keeping tabs on, that they can prevent just by doing regular, maintenance on their devices.
Yeah, a car is the best analogy there is because it's something that everyone uses every day, and they know if they don't get their oil changed, their tires rotated, whatever those things are, or even just their inspection to be on the road safely. If they don't do those things, they're at a higher risk of having a failure. And so we basically tell people, okay, you own this kind of sterilizer. That means you should be doing a flush cycle this many amount of times. You should send a spore sample to a laboratory to make sure it's actually cleaning itself, which is a compliance and regulatory requirement. You also change its gaskets once a quarter. You should do a true plan maintenance once a year where somebody comes in and basically says, hey, here are the things that can go wrong or that are corroding. Let's get ahead of those. And then if it does break down, going to the other things that we do, you can click a button in our product and dispatch a service technician. And so you can actually have somebody come and do a repair event instead of you going to the shop like with your car. We'll send, a technician into your office, do the actual maintenance or so the repair or the service and transact on it. And then we use the data inside of our system. So how often is it failing? How much is it costing you? How old is that machine? Is it already depreciated? Is it failing more often than the average device that we know about across all of our clients that are similar? And we use all these data points to inform you of potential problematic machines so we can say, get rid of this thing before it becomes a problem. So put on a replacement list. So next time it breaks, stop putting good money after bad. We all have that moment, even with our cars, where it's like, okay, this is like a $2,000 repair. Yeah. Is it even worth it anymore? Because I've been driving it for 8 years. I've been thinking about a new car. Like maybe this is that signal for me to get it. And we make those decisions a lot of times emotionally or because we're just fed up with it. But sometimes financially, it could make sense to go forward with that repair. Or it could say, even if it's only $200, it's so old and has failed so much for you that it's not worth keeping it. Get rid of it. So we use data to help you with that informed decision making on when to get rid of it too.
That's awesome. I think there's a huge opportunity in taking shared experiences with different devices and kind of open sourcing that to your customers, letting them see this is the real data. This is not hypothetical. This definitely is not from the manufacturer, but they're going to promote. Maybe you could share, like, what are one or two things that you come across regularly that just people are not doing in their day-to-day that, meaningfully is harming the tools they're using, the device they're using, and, it's probably creating more business for you in the long run, but creating more headaches for them, and it's totally preventative,
Yeah. Okay. Dental is one of the biggest industries we're in, and it's because there's so many dental offices. There's 120,000 plus in the US when there's only 10,000 urgent cares in the US. So it's like a big number. And so when a dental office, like we see people with hand pieces, those things that whir whenever you're like, you get a little scared of the drill sound, whatever those are. They have a lot of hand pieces.
Air or electric, you do both?
Both. Okay. And there are sometimes those pieces need lubricants or bearing replacements or small things that you can actually do in the office for pretty cheap if you just knew to do it in a regular fashion. But sometimes what they do is they wait for it to break. And then that can end up costing a few $100s or maybe even up to like $1,000, which then makes no sense to repair. But they sometimes wait till it's catastrophic and they have to go buy a new one while this one's out for repair when they could have just avoided it altogether had they just lubricated it or they sharpened these machines in a regular way.
So you would have a checklist that runs them through all list their equipment, when's the due for the next maintenance, the next lubrication or whatever, and then they would say they've done that, and they would remind them the next time?
Right. So we have a task engine that assigns tasks to people, and you track that they've done it, and they can even upload things like pictures, notes, they sign off on it saying that they've done it, so it keeps a tracker of it. So yeah, it keeps them accountable. And then there's a dashboard for managers, or if you own multiple locations, you can see all of your locations in a single view saying like who isn't doing what they're supposed to be doing. But we those tasks based on what you own. So we're not telling you to do this kind of maintenance for a machine that you don't even have in your office. We curate it based on exactly what you have in your office.
That's really cool. Now, is this, then if an issue were to come up, you would have the ability to make the service call you mentioned directly in your app. What's the turnaround time? Is someone coming that week?
Yeah, so there's ways to dispatch multiple kinds of people. One is if you already have a relationship with a service vendor that you've used for years, and
Like a
you just
Shine or a Patterson.
Shine, Patterson, Sinclair, doesn't matter. And so you can actually add them into our tool. And all you're doing is just dispatching them a different way. Instead of calling them, our system is basically alerting them on your behalf in the same fashion. But the difference is we actually give them better data than you do over the phone because we tell them the make, the model, the serial number, the year of install, who touched it last, where you're located. So all these things they ask you over the phone, you're like, well, I don't know the model. I don't know the serial number. I'm not going to turn it around and figure it out. We give it to them in real time. So it's actually a better experience. Because of that, sometimes they come out faster. So we don't control a lot of times how quickly they get out there, but we do try our best to get a quicker turnaround time for you because we also have a marketplace of independent people we know in your area that maybe can get out faster. So if your traditional rep says, hey, I can only get out there next week because I have too many things going on.
Yeah.
And it's something in your mind that can't wait till next week. You can engage in our marketplace to see if somebody coming out next day in 2 days. And so we at least give you the resources and the tools to know where else to go because a lot of people don't even know that. So that's kind of how our product works. Eventually we'll become Uber-esque, but for now it's really just do what you need, but we have this secondary, what we call a surge resource for your times of need.
Oh, that's awesome. So we've talked a little about the preventative side. Everyone should be paying attention and making sure they're doing their regular maintenance on their tools. You have the restorative side. You bring a technician on site to hopefully do something that can be fixed in the office. And then you mentioned you actually have a warehouse or a workshop in Florida, you mentioned, correct?
We do. So we have a handpiece repair depot in Florida. And again, because it's one of the most problematic or failed devices in an office, and it's such a small device, they can ship it somewhere and we can ship it back. So instead of having to wait for somebody to come out to your office, we can send you a label, put it in a box, send it to us. We'll give you a quote on what it's going to take so we can do our diagnostics in the shop. And you can say, yes, do it, or no, send it back, or just keep it, like it's not worth it anymore. And so we kind of help you with that. So we do have a repair depot.
Not to, put you on the spot, but are there any brands or any models that our listeners should stay away from or, should gravitate towards, given it's a highly repairable device?
That's a good question. And I don't want to answer that, not to protect any manufacturers, but really it's because we're also coming into our own with a huge data set. Because I don't want to say anything that's incorrect. One of the things that we do is a lot of repairs are coming in because people aren't doing their job, like the actual offices. So it's hard to blame a manufacturer if they're telling you to lubricate this thing once a month or once a year, once a quarter, and you're not doing that job, knowing that's what it takes. It's one of those, we don't want to play a blame game, and we'll wait till we have more data to where we can actually start pointing in a general direction versus pointing a finger as to why that's happening more than others.
What about technologies? Are you finding electric is much more reliable than air? I mean, lower maintenance maybe on one over the other, or?
Yeah, it's the same problems right now, which is we're still kind of gathering the data. I wish we had more data. So part of the problem, this is a good point, is we're the first company to create this kind of data set. So we don't have a lot to look back on to say historically, how has this gone? Because people don't have that historical data, not even the manufacturers, not even the big distributors. And so we're inventing the data set we're learning on. So it's taking us time, a couple of years, of a lot more data. And the more we grow, the quicker our data set gets bigger. So we're in that ramp up period where we're getting better about it. So it's me in the sense of saying, I will be able to answer that question in a couple of years from now. But for now, we're still getting as much data as possible so I can tell you an accurate answer versus,
Well, I think there's some really good points there. I mean, I just recently purchased a 2-in-1 washer dryer. It's got a heat pump built into it, and I was so thrilled that you just throw your laundry in, it comes clean and dry. Well, I didn't realize the maintenance requirements are significantly larger. Like every third run, you got to take apart the whole filter unit, get a vacuum cleaner in there, and it's funny because I didn't do any of that maintenance work because I don't think most people do. And within a month, it started not drying. I was like, what is going on with this thing? And for sure enough, I read on the forums and they're like, yes, we had QR codes all over that you should have scanned to read the maintenance, but no one actually reads these maintenance things. And the performance of the machine actually significantly degraded by not doing the regular maintenance. And, I kind of started to do it. I vacuumed everything out, got the little cleaner kit that came with it that I never opened, and sure enough, one little maintenance, 10 minutes of work, and it worked good again. And it was good for, over a month and didn't have, but every time you have a new piece of equipment, every time there's a new technology, there's a huge amount of responsibility and maintenance that goes along with it. And I think through no fault of the distributors or the people selling these tools, they're just not incentivized to ensure that you properly maintain all of your things. And some could argue maybe they're de-incentivized for that. So how does your business model work? Why would I want to choose uptime?
Well, one is, like you mentioned, I'm going to take one step back where when you bought your washer and dryer, I don't think enough people ask the question of, I like the way this looks. It's going to operate great in my house, but like, what is my responsibility to make sure this machine is always running? And I think that question doesn't get asked enough in the buying process.
Mm-hmm.
So I think overall, we're trying to change behavior by saying, if you have a tool to manage and monitor it, more likely than not, you're going to ask, what is now the responsibility of my team that I'm adding on to them? If I did get this machine, am I creating 3 more tasks a week for them? And will they feel overwhelmed or will they not? So I think it's one of those, like, put the responsibility a little bit back on the business or the buyer, but over time we hope that it becomes institutional knowledge to that nature. But
I think there's a huge opportunity for like a buyer's guide where it's like you could fill an honest search. Like if you ask me, Josh, how much maintenance are you willing to do on anything? It's probably close to 0. And then give me the products that maybe you pay more for but have really low maintenance. And to have that insight, I could just see tremendous value. I mean, I love the machine that I have. The benefits, I think, far outweigh the negatives. But I probably wouldn't have bought it if they told me all the steps I had to do. I was like, every third wash, I got to take a vacuum cleaner out and vacuum a filter. Like,
yeah, you're like, that's insane because I've never had to do that my whole life. And so
yeah.
I believe people want to use this for the following reasons. One, they just don't know how to take care of their equipment. So demystifying that already is going to be a value add. Second is, even if they have a way to understand what to do, they don't have a way to manage it and monitor it in an easy way. Like pen and paper and clipboards isn't the way to do that. So our product, again, allows you to make sure you're holding people accountable, which is a big thing, but also training whenever you see a consistent issue. Because a lot of times you can't figure out trends until way late in the game, and maybe that person's no longer in your office, or you don't realize where the genesis of the problem was, but it was always just poor training. So it allows you to understand those moments. And you can even put in training videos and SOPs into every task. So if there's a new person in your office and they get assigned a task, they're not waiting around for someone to train them how to do it. They can just watch a video, or they can just download a step-by-step guide on, like, how do I do this? Similar to your vacuuming thing. You didn't have to go on the forum in our system. Like, it would just be there in the task, like that was assigned to you already. So that's one of the things. The other thing is it finally aggregates the data that if I asked you, or I asked any dental office or urgent care office or surgical center today to say, how much did you spend on your service events and how much did that cost you from a missed revenue standpoint today? What would that look like? They can't answer that question. But with my product, you finally can.
More than a repair bill, probably.
Yeah, exactly. Way more than the repair bill. Or it's, what are the products, because I have a little bit more cash flow and maybe I'm trying to reduce my tax liability, or maybe trying to get in a consistent, steady cadence of replacing old equipment, whatever your thing might be. What are the things that I should replace first because they're actually problematic versus the things that look old or that feel like somebody's yelling at me a ton for? We can use data to support decisions. And a lot of times, especially for the people with multiple locations, they can bulk those purchases together and get a discount on that purchase because they're doing it all at once instead of real time, no negotiating power because you need it tomorrow and you're going to overnight ship it. So you're going to pay for same day air. Like, there's a lot of more inefficiency because of that. And we're getting ahead of those problems too.
I always think about these things. We have a tendency to think about, okay, that ham piece in the operatory, and we're thinking just about that ham piece. But I mean, if we step back, how many devices do you think is normal to have? Like, I think a lot of people wouldn't even acknowledge the amount of devices that need maintenance in their office. Like, people probably think about the ham piece. They probably think about the sterilizing unit, the Lucy or whatever. But how many devices are you overseeing in a typical office, whether it be a dental office or other healthcare provider?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on, one, what kind of healthcare they provide, as you can imagine, how many exam rooms or operatories or whatever they might have so that all plays a game in the factor of number. But going back to dental office, because we're on that theme, like, you can probably estimate, 7 or so devices per operatory. And then there's probably some things that are more communal, like a sterilizer, a vacuum,
Mhm.
a compressor, your chairs. Like, so when you think about other things that need
So
maintenance,
not
like,
to like jump ahead, but likely over 100 devices in many dental offices that need some sort of maintenance. And likely, if you didn't do maintenance today, or for sure not this week, you're behind schedule.
yeah, I think so. I think so for our average office, I think it's around 60 to 70 like that we're seeing. And I'm seeing like a 60 or 6, 7 bay or operatory bay kind
Yeah.
of dental office. But yeah, because you have your CBCTs, if you have X-ray, that has its own like compliance as well as service, your chairs, but even as small things like your amalgam separators that take out
Yeah.
the salt from the water lines, those traps need to be cleaned out because they can come clogged and then create issues for your chairs and your water line. So it's like
For suction and the water spray.
right. And so in some people didn't even know there's sometimes a filter in their compressor that they need to change out. And the compressor can take down your whole office. So it's like these are the things that we're just trying to make sure like if you are down and there's an unplanned event, it's hopefully a real problem, not something that you caused. It's something that because of wear and tear on the machine of how much you've used it that caused it, but not I forgot to do this one simple task in a quarter, like
Yeah.
your dryer situation. Like that's not the reason we want you to be down.
So what should you be allotting as far so there's two questions here. So like who should do all this work? Like what's your best practice? Is the person who works out that operatory needs to maintain their own tools and then you assign someone to do the communal, or how do you divide the maintenance given that it is mission critical?
Yeah, so I think an office manager should probably steer the ship, like know what's in their office and be accountable to making sure all the tasks are done. And I'll never prescribe like how each office should run. Like if they want to make every week a different person's responsible, great. Or do they want to make it like a gang tackle approach where anyone who's part of these job functions should be able to do this, especially if they see that it needs to be done still, because you can do that kind of assignment in our product too.
Oh,
So to me,
cool.
it's one of those where there's no right way to do it, but as long as the office manager is doing it in a way that they can monitor and control it, I recommend that they steer the ship more than anybody else.
Okay. And then now that we've got everyone scared and worried they haven't done any maintenance in the last 6 months on their machines, what's the time allotment? Is this something that's like, every day you should spend 10 minutes, every week you spend a half hour? How do you kind of section this out so it's not, or maybe it ought to be a daily task, but how do you approach it?
Yeah, so we see people do everything from opening duties to closing duties, and it's like a quick checklist. Like, even when you open up a restaurant, I always like to use analogies that are more familiar to the masses, but it's like you got to flick on the open sign. You got to make sure that your trash cans have new trash bags in there. There's like things that you do just to make sure you're ready for people to come into your dental office, your urgent care. So as
Mm-hmm.
part of those just opening duty tasks, add some of the things that are more maintenance driven, like check your AED batteries to make sure they're not expired. Make sure that you did do your spore sample that week on Friday when you are taking out the trash to the curb or whatnot. So I think there are things that we would ask you to probably bake into your opening and closing duties just to simplify maybe the ping ponging of people's attention. But then otherwise, like if there's slower days or sorry, slower hours in your days, that might be lunchtime or that might be later in the day or early in the morning, like try and stack your task around that time. And if there's a slower day of the week, like Thursdays for some reason, I'm just making up an example,
Yeah.
then shift your weekly task to that Thursday. And so like that way your team isn't just idle. They're doing things that are important to your practice. You're not paying your staff money for not doing.
So this should be done within the regular hours of your operations. This does not require an additional admin day.
No.
This is, more things that aren't that time consuming. We just forget about them.
Yeah, I even tell people outside of requesting a service event and just wanting to track it, like you shouldn't, like the average person shouldn't be spending more than a few minutes a day in our product. Like we're not trying to be your everything. We just want to be a
Mhm.
place where you can manage your things. And so if you do your task assignments correctly, maybe it only takes a minute or two of people each person's day. If you stack all on one person, it could take up to 20, 30 minutes. Like, but you're doing that intentionally because you think that's the right way to run your office more than anything else.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. I mean, how much does regular maintenance reduce, more major service? Is there like, if you do this, you're going to reduce service calls by 20%? Is there any sort of research behind that?
Yeah, so the average research will tell you, and again, we want to have the data speak for itself once we have that data amassed.
Yeah.
But now the average research will tell you that if you do traditional maintenance activities, you can reduce unplanned down events 10 to 20%. So that means just like failures that happen. But you can also
Yeah.
extend the life of the equipment 10 to 20%. So you're seeing a cost savings on just ownership cost and life cycle cost. And you're also seeing a longevity increase. So getting more ROI for that machine or not having to replace it as quickly. Like both those are kind of double dipping into like the why there's an advantage to doing it.
I just learned last year that you're supposed to empty your hot water tank once a year, and that doubles the length of it. Apparently, my plumber told me as he replaced my hot water tank, and I was like, I have had a hot water tank for 20 years. I've never done this. And he's like, well, that's why you keep on replacing them. So I think, there's so many things that there's, catastrophic causes to, both on your ability to have that uptime, but also in, the quality of life that device has. And no, it's really great to see that you've created such a comprehensive tool to stay on top of these sorts of things. So is this a subscription model? Do people pay you a monthly fee to manage all of this? And then from there, they would have to pay additionally for service calls because obviously it's outside of you. And then if they need to send something to the depot, they would do that in addition as well? Or how does that work?
Exactly. So there is just a SaaS fee for the software. So a subscription that depending on how much of the tool you want, if you don't want all of our bells and whistles, you don't have to pay for it. So it could be as cheap as $20 a month per location to as much as $140 a month per location. Because in that bigger subscription, you have a lot more data power. You have even things like internet connected devices that we can have the device tell you what's wrong with it. So it's trending and monitoring. So like if you want to get that futuristic, you can get that with us as well. And then if you do have a service event, those are, on demand calls, so you can pay for that extra. But we even have things now like what we would call like a saver or a service club or a planned maintenance package you can subscribe to from us, and we'll help offset some of that cost. So we can send out technicians proactively on your behalf to come out once a year to do all the critical infrastructure planned maintenance and then go back. But you're getting a cost savings because you're prepaying for it with us. And if you have that maintenance plan, then you can get a discount on all other service events that might happen as well. So it's just a way for us to try and reduce that cost of ownership. And that's really all we're trying to do. Because we believe using our product will reduce the service burden. So therefore, we don't have to charge as much to make sure that you're up and running either.
It makes total sense. I think a lot of this, you're preventing the problem that never happens. And, how do we remind people of that is often, the good news is I'm sure most of your customers come on the heels of a catastrophic event where they don't want to repeat that problem.
Right.
But how do you remind people? Do you have some sort of like, hey, you've prevented this amount of downtime by, keep up your checklist? Like, do you have any things that get people motivated around, completing their tasks for the day or the week?
I wish we had a really good stat around that because I do want to eventually put like almost like a gamification of like you've saved X by using Uptime Health. But the worst part of being the first market mover that we are is there's not a baseline that people can measure from. So even if every one of our clients experiences ROI and they tell us, they write us great reviews, they are referrals for our next client because they're like, we can't quantify this, and we know it because we never had a baseline to say how much we improved from. But what we do know is things are easier. We are on top of our stuff more. We don't feel like we're repairing as much. So it's like, it's a little bit of a feeling, but we need more baseline data set to show what we've done for people.
I mean, I've personally, and I probably have more experiences around dental office than the average person given. I personally experienced downtime through equipment failure. So I can only imagine, if you were to put a gun to my head and say, what do you think it is? I would say probably 3 to 5% of downtime is through service failure, that's actually kind of a large number. If if it's only 3%, that's a day every quarter that you can't provide treatment because of something that was totally preventable.
Right.
And think of the patient experience around that, whether it's once a month, once a quarter, even once a year, doesn't really matter the frequency for that patient. It matters that they showed up, they took the time off work, they were fully prepared and, paying for service that you weren't able to treat. And now they have to do it again. And I imagine like that, do you ever hear about those stories about how, frustrated the patient is, how they came to find you and to hopefully, not have this problem in the future?
Yeah, I mean, think about it this way. I am a patient too, right? Like I go to the dentist office, the urgent care office, and I know if I do have a dental appointment, I am planning my day around going out of my
You have to.
office. Oh, like maybe it's during my lunch break, whatever it is. I'm taking time out of my day to drive there, go there. And if I show up and I can't be seen because something happened to the machine, obviously I don't want to be seen by a faulty machine, don't get me wrong. But you just wasted my day.
Mm.
And there's so many dental offices out there. I'm just going to call around and go to the next one that's available because I have free time right now. So you might have lost me for that one day, but you might have lost me forever. I might go to this new office every time moving forward because they
I,
got me, they didn't have any issues, and that's how I feel about it.
I feel like there's two things that make people stay away. 2 or 3 star reviews. People don't ever enter your building. I always tell people that. No one picks a 2 star dentist. No
Yeah.
one. I've eaten at 2 star restaurants, and like they're a lot better than what I would imagine a 2 star dentist to be. But the other thing is, I would never go to an office where the tools you're using feel like they're about to break or are breaking while they use them, because like the bearings are about to go. I mean, I imagine it's like a car. They will operate with faulty bearings. There'll just be more vibration, more issues in using the handpiece. And if you don't catch that, that means you're going to have less accurate drilling, more pain for the patient. Are these the things that you experience as well, that people are just like, it's breaking in the patient's mouth if they're not doing the maintenance?
I will say I will give the providers credit where if they feel that it's happening, they're usually not doing that. What they will do
Okay.
though is they're like, well, does somebody else have a handpiece or can we share this thing until
Yeah.
mine?
They're pushing patients to different chairs to compensate.
It's really the operational burden because they are getting ahead of it and being like, okay, we shouldn't use this, but then what? Then it's like, okay, well, let's reschedule here. Let's do that. Let me work when you're not working there. And it just becomes again, a burnout issue. And we hear
Mhm.
about burnout all the time, but we're manufacturing more burnout moments by not doing the simple things. That's really
Yeah,
it.
and it's funny that have you read the book Checklist Manifesto?
I've been recommended to read it, but I've not read it,
Uh,
unfortunately.
Phenomenal book. And essentially, yeah, when air travel was first designed, the casualty rates were extremely high. It was not a very safe form of travel. And they essentially established the checklist for a pilot. A pilot does, the only reason there's actually a co-pilot is to confirm with the pilot that the checklist is correct. And that literally transformed flying to being one of the more dangerous forms of transportation to the safest form of transportation. And I think, often the simplest solution, like a checklist of things you need to do, is the correct one. So it's great to see that you've taken something that is so time honored and obvious, and you've kind of put a technology wrap on it to make it more approachable and make it more routine or habitual, I guess would be the appropriate word. Um,
Absolutely.
Looking ahead, what are you seeing in the device game that gets you really excited? You mentioned Internet of Things devices. That seems like a little bit of a buzzword. Maybe you can unpack the future of devices and what we can have something to look forward to.
I think there will be more connected devices in the future. I mean, they're already been working on it. I think cybersecurity has always been an issue for some people in terms of turning it on or wanting to like entertain that. But I think cybersecurity is getting to a point now where manufacturers are doing the right things and they're doing the right things. They've learned enough to limit maybe that being an entry point for an issue. And so we're going to start seeing more of these connected machines. And with a product like mine or any competitor that wants to come along, that's fine, like then you'll have like call it like a Google Home or like a device hub that
Mm-hmm.
all the machines that are talking to a single pane of glass, and that if there are issues, like they're self-alerting and they're self actually sending out technicians and telling the technician what part to have to fix itself. So it's no longer tech comes out to your office, looks at it saying, oh, I need that part. I'm gonna go back to my shop. I'll be back the next morning, come out. That's 3 truck rolls and it's extra day of downtime. So we can avoid those kinds of things with the future of those devices. I also see devices being owned differently in the future, like in the sense of, a cell phone model where people are subscribing to devices that are lower dollar amounts versus
Mm-hmm.
buying. So instead of paying, call it $5,000, $10,000 that you have to find to get the newest innovation into your office, you might be able to subscribe to it and then buy it. Like subscribe to it for a few months to make
I
sure
mean,
that.
essentially, you cut the bank out of the picture, right? The bank is financing that subscription in monthly payments.
Right.
If you remove them as a Henry Schein, you provide the monthly payments directly. you're probably going to earn a few points on that decision,
Yeah, and
while making your devices far more approachable.
yeah, and the thing is that everybody wins in this world because it allows newer technology to enter into the dental's or any kind of office faster. So they're not waiting till aggregating enough cash to buy the new thing. They're just being able to do it immediately. And then they can also see how often are they using it. Are they getting the ROI immediately? So it gives them more confidence to utilize it. Or they're like, look, I thought this machine I was going to use it a ton, and I spent 100 grand on it, but I've only ever used it like 7 times. And I'm not saying that happens, but it happens. It truly does.
Are you
And
tracking usage? Like how many hours a device is being used before it gets service?
so that's when the IoT, like, so for the IoT products we have right now, yes. The ones that aren't connected, it's much tougher because it's just asking the users to input more data that they're
Yeah.
like, my day's already
So
busy.
you assume just a 10-hour workday on some devices, but the future is going to be interconnected. You were mentioning diagnostic information directly from the handpiece going into the software to give you a behind-the-scenes glimpse of things that the computer's reading, but aren't necessarily informing you directly.
Right. And then I also see the last feature I'll basically maybe comment on is I see a lot more tools being interconnected as well. So we're talking about different kinds of manufacturers, software providers, whatever it might be, that are being able to work together on the back end. So if you have, the latest and greatest CBCT, easily getting the next generation AI product that's reading those images, doing the thing, then that's already talking to the practice management solution to get the billing right. That's then talking to the operatory bay to make sure it's scheduled for the future. But I see a connection that's more of a connected world that also just helps with automating workflow. So in different manufacturers working together to get it done.
Do you see it more open source? I feel like, if we were to go back 25 years and we had Schick sensors that only worked with this imaging software and, you had everything seemed to be very restrictive. Do you see it becoming more open source, more,
I think, I don't know about, I guess the word open source is a good
fair enough. It's not going to become public domain, but I mean, playing nicely with each other, open ecosystem, the Android model versus, the iPhone model.
I foresee that becoming more prevalent. Now, how much of the market will it capture? I'm not sure, but I can see that happening more and more and more. And eventually, I truly hope that it becomes a standard versus a, just a random, maybe 10% of the market does that. I hope it's like 50 to 60% of the market is really interoperable that way.
Yeah, it needs to be, right? At the end of the day, I think over the course of time within these sort of industries, devices and tools become more specialized to the provider that's needing them. That's how they're going to advance. And if we're going that route, that means there's going to be different major players across all the different devices and tools that these specialists use or these healthcare providers use, and their ability to work with each other is critical.
Yeah, I think at the end of the day, people at some point, especially in places like healthcare and other big infrastructure things that us as the population really need, we have to at least put down a little bit of the fiefdom, like protecting the castle, but looking out more for the patient. And protecting the castles, driving up the cost of healthcare, driving up or kind of decreasing the access to new solutions that are really going to improve patient care. That's not a great world to live in. But if we can kind of keep people still becoming profitable and not trying to reduce profit, and we can kind of have this collective ecosystem really driving the future, I think the patient wins, which is the biggest thing. The provider wins because they have less overhead at some level. And then everybody eats. The pie is big enough for everybody to eat. And I think that's the thing to know at the end of the day.
Is it fair to say that your target customer group is, 1 to maybe 5, 10 locations, but certainly within the SMB market?
Yeah, I would say anyone who owns multiple locations, our product is kind of like a must-have because you can manage, like we have clients that have hundreds of locations. So you can manage, multiple locations in a single place to make sure they're doing their compliance, maintenance, and standardizing those kinds of activities, which is tough when you're growing and just acquiring. The single office, it's really the first. Right now we're in the phase of life where it's the first movers that have been doing it. We have many of those kinds of clients, and we're starting to get it to become more mainstream, and then getting more of those other doctors to kind of jump in. Because for those, it's like we've operated this way for 20 years, and like why would we change now? Versus us letting them know you're going to save money, all this other thing. It's more of a change problem than an actual product problem.
Yeah, I think a lot of what excites me about the future of technology and healthcare specifically is we're seeing more and more tools that are opening up some of the advantages that large corporations have essentially had a birthright to. Like on-demand replacements, Heartland Dental can facilitate that. They're big enough. They can have a whole team that goes into regions and fixes things overnight and repairs them. But your average 10 location, your average individual doctor, it's on them. And I think what excites me the most, whether it be Intivio or Uptime, or a lot of other software vendors that we've been talking to, is that we are giving them access to things that 10 years ago were just for the large corporations. And we're now putting it at anyone's fingertips to compete not only on services and the devices they use, but making sure those devices are running properly, that they're actually available for when the patients need them, and that when they do go out for repair, the downtime isn't costly or extensive. And I think this is another great example of giving people who are maybe stretched on time and resources more opportunities to compete in areas that they wouldn't have been 10 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we priced our product in a really efficient way to where like we're not more than like $1,000 a year, like to the average. If you're making $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 a year, which is a very low producing practice, we're less than 1% of your revenue, but we're protecting one of the most critical things that produce revenue for you. So
I think most people would agree a patient is worth, 10, 15, I've seen as high as $30,000 to an office. And you think if something fails and that appointment you jeopardize, well, all you need to do is save one patient every 5 years and you paid for the system. Like it's not a huge ROI. And I think even as you rightfully mentioned, it's actually not even about money. Money ends up being the barometer, the measuring stick that we often will measure our problems against because it's convenient. But how do you measure, reliability, uptime, and patient experience? You can't; those don't really equate. But I do agree. I think the biggest awesome thing is that like there's really no barrier to entry. I mean, $20 a month, I'm drinking more Starbucks than that.
Our pitches used to be when we would walk into office pre-COVID, right? Like when we first started, I would see that there's a TV in the lobby, and obviously they're running some cable kind of show. And I'd be like, that TV that nobody is watching, I'm looking at your lobby, they're all on their phones or looking at magazines, and it's on a channel that nobody cares about. You're probably paying $70, $80 a month for that cable bill. I was like, so it's a useless cost. I'm trying to sell you something that's going to help you with compliance, equipment management, better like bottom line, and you're balking at $70 to $80 a month. I was like, you can see we're less than your cable bill, like, and yet ours is useful and this one is not. And it was like one of those, like, we're trying to draw analogies to other just wasted cost, but for some reason we're scrutinized, but the cable bill is not.
Yeah, it's definitely, I mean, like I said, I think the biggest challenge that you have is people take for granted uptime. And it probably comes on the heels of a really bad situation they wish they could have prevented. And I think that's, is making sure that people stay excited and stoked that they're preventing downtime. Like, how do you change that mindset?
Right.
Well, this has been such a phenomenal conversation. Really appreciate your time here. Is there anything you want to leave us off on, before anything you want to chat through before we wind up today?
No, really. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just people learning more about how equipment management is an important thing and we should pay attention to it more. And with all the analogies you were talking about with your washer, dryer, our cars, anything else that we have, like we understand its importance, but it's time right now for the doctors and dentists out there to understand that maintenance in general, just upkeep of these machines are more important than they think. And it hasn't been focused on enough. And we're trying to make sure the focus shifts back on it.
Wonderful. And where can people hear more about you? Do you have a website or socials that you can?
Yeah, like so we're Uptime Health, so it's UPTIME. So just like downtime, we're the opposite. We're Uptime, and health, HEALTH, like .com. So that's basically how you can find us on our website. We're all over LinkedIn and social media, so you can find us anywhere. And we try and produce a bunch of just interesting topics and conversation that should help anyone just learn more about what we're talking about. So happy to help wherever anyone sees fit.
Yeah, and I would love to hear more about the data as it comes available. I think, open sourcing some of those data and sharing online is going to provide really good insight and help people see maybe not what their experience could be like, but to know like at the end of the day, this is just math. If there's a risk out there that's going to affect you, 1% of the time, there's only a certain amount of time before that 1% catches up with you. And I think giving people data behind that, showing them like, hey, you're right, you will run for 300,000 hours, fine. But it's these 20 hours afterwards that really catch up with you. Would be such a great resource for the community. I think it would drive a lot of value in doing this regular maintenance. So, Jinesh, thank you so much for coming here. Really appreciate you having you on. Love to hear what Uptime Health is doing. And yeah, super excited to see this advance more and more into, get to see it maybe hands-on one day, which would be really exciting.
Let's do it. Well, I appreciate you, Josh, having me on. And again, thank you for everyone who had a chance to listen to this.
Yeah, thank you. All right, everyone, that's caps it for today. But thank you for listening. And as Jinesh said, uptimehealth.com, also on LinkedIn, on socials everywhere. Would love to hear your feedback. And feel free to reach out for more information. That concludes our podcast for today, and hope everyone had a great day. Bye for now.